In the heart of Appalachia, on a quiet street in Moundsville, West Virginia, sits a hill that should not exist. It is 62 feet tall, 240 feet wide, and it contains more than 60,000 tons of earth, piled there by human hands more than 2,000 years ago. Locals walk past it every day. Tourists climb its concrete steps. But what sleeps beneath it has never been fully uncovered. Its name is Grave Creek Mound, the largest conical burial mound in North America. And recent scientific surveys are now revealing something that has left archaeologists deeply unsettled. There are chambers inside this mound that no human has entered in nearly 2,000 years. Chambers that were identified, then sealed away from history. And the reason they remain sealed is far darker than most Americans have ever been told. Why, in an age of CT scanners, genetic sequencing, and ground-penetrating radar, has no one been allowed to dig all the way down? The answer involves a missing artifact, a forgotten affidavit, a federal law most Americans have never heard of, and a stone tablet whose disappearance may have been deliberate. The stakes are not small. Grave Creek is not just a pile of dirt. It is a sealed time capsule from a people who vanished without writing, without maps, and without explanation. A people who moved roughly 57,000 tons of soil, one basket at a time, without wheels, without horses, without metal tools. And a parallel monument rises 160 miles away, on a bluff above the great Miami River in Ohio. Miamisburg Mound, 65 feet tall, 800 feet around, one of the two largest conical mounds in the eastern United States. Inside both lie chambers that were identified, then abandoned. What is buried inside them could rewrite the history of pre-Columbian America, but you will probably never see it. To understand why, you have to understand who built these things. Between roughly 500 BC and 100 AD, a mysterious culture archaeologists now call the Adena dominated the Ohio Valley. They spread across what is now Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and New York. They had no written language that anyone alive today can read. They lived in small, scattered villages of circular bark-covered houses, and yet, somehow, they coordinated the construction of thousands of earthen monuments, mounds, sacred circles, causeways, enclosures, some of them hundreds of feet wide. How an unwritten culture organized such massive engineering is a question modern archaeology still cannot answer. At its height, the flatland that is now the city of Moundsville was blanketed with these structures. 47 by one count, maybe more. But then something happened. Farmers plowed them, treasure hunters gutted them, developers bulldozed them flat. An entire ancient landscape, erased in less than a century. Today, only Grave Creek survives, a lonely monument standing directly across the street from the grim stone walls of the old West Virginia Penitentiary, a fortress for the dead, facing a fortress for the damned. The story of what lies inside and what was taken begins on March 19th, 1838. A local landowner named Abelard Tomlinson, together with his brother-in-law Thomas Biggs, signed a 30-year lease on the mound. They were not archaeologists, they were treasure hunters, bankrolled by a wheeling physician named Dr. James Clemens, who borrowed around $2,600, more than $60,000 in today's money. They began driving a horizontal tunnel into the north face of the hill, hoping to strike a buried king. For weeks they dug. Nothing. Then, at roughly 111 feet in, their picks finally struck timber. They had reached a burial chamber cut into the original ground surface beneath the mound, 8 feet by 12 feet, 7 feet deep, lined with upright logs, covered with river cobbles. Inside lay two skeletons, heads nearly touching, feet pointing in opposite directions. The wear on their teeth suggested they had lived about 60 years. The bones were too decayed to confirm sex, but one of them had been buried with hundreds of disc-shaped shell beads, and the excavation was only beginning. Because what they would find next would ignite one of the longest-running cover-ups in American archaeology. Encouraged, the diggers sank a vertical shaft from the summit and a second horizontal tunnel halfway up the slope. On June 9th, 1838, the two new shafts intersected. They had found a second vault, an upper burial chamber, holding a single body. The grave goods were staggering: 1,700 ivory or bone beads, roughly 500 seashells from the Gulf Coast, 5 copper bracelets from the Great Lakes, and 150 paper-thin plates of mica from the southern Appalachians. Exotic materials, continental trade, a single body, treated like royalty. But the truly unsettling find was much smaller, barely 2 inches wide, just under 1.5 inches tall. A disc of fine gray sandstone, inscribed on one side with a string of mysterious characters, 3 rows of them, 23 to 25 symbols in total, and then a final orphaned glyph, like a signature, They called it the Grave Creek Stone, and no one, in 1838, and arguably not even today, could read it. That single small object would become one of the most controversial artifacts in American history, because what it suggested, mainstream archaeology was not prepared to accept. The ethnologist Henry Rowe Schoolcraft declared the symbols the work of ancient Celts from Britain or Iberia. Other scholars, squinting at early drawings, claimed they resembled Phoenician, Etruscan, ancient Greek, Egyptian, Tunisian, even scripts from the interior of Algeria. Linguist Barry Fell later argued the inscription was Iberian Punic. Anthropologist David Kelly considered the characters clearly alphabetic. For a brief, vertiginous moment, the Grave Creek Stone seemed to prove what no textbook allowed, that someone from somewhere across the Atlantic had reached the Ohio Valley 2,000 years before Columbus. If that was true, then everything written about ancient America was wrong. But then, and this is the part the mainstream rarely mentions, the stone disappeared. It passed into the collection of an archaeologist named E. H. Davis, then vanished from view. The bulk of his collection was later sold to a museum in England and quietly absorbed into the British Museum. Today, only 4 plaster casts at the Smithsonian, a single wax impression, and a handful of old drawings remain. The original, if it was genuine, is simply gone, hidden, lost, or deliberately removed. Modern orthodoxy says the stone was a hoax. In 2008, anthropologist David Oestreicher argued that Dr. Clemens himself had forged it, copying symbols from a 1752 Spanish reference book on ancient coins to rescue his bankrupt excavation. For decades, the case was considered closed, but recent research has cracked it wide open again, drawing on long-forgotten archives that were only recently rediscovered. Investigators have uncovered something that should never have been overlooked. A laborer named Peter Catlett signed a sworn affidavit in 1876, swearing he personally pulled the stone from inside a stone arch near the vault's interior, with no chance for fraud. A second eyewitness, a Colonel Wharton, confirmed his account under oath. Even the skeptics now admit Dr. Clemens did record the stone the very day it was found, a detail that was suppressed by his own editor and erased from the official publication. So, hoax or cover-up? A forgery? Or the only readable artifact from a vanished American civilization? The truth is, no one can prove it, because the stone itself is missing, and someone, at some point, wanted it that way. But the missing stone is only the first thing the mounds refuse to give up. The next part of this story is where it turns genuinely dark. The 1838 tunneling was catastrophic. It destroyed the stratigraphy modern archaeology needs, but it also missed things. In 1859, a Moundsville antiquarian named Wills de Haas published a forgotten pamphlet asking for funding to investigate a stunning new find. After Tomlinson's abandoned underground museum collapsed, at least 2, possibly 3. Additional burial chambers had been exposed, sitting outside the original tunnels, midway between the upper and lower vaults. De Haas described additional skeletons, and the remains of what he called an altar, a fireplace. Those chambers have never been fully excavated. Not in 1859, not in the 1970s when the first truly scientific survey was conducted. Not today, they are still in there, sealed inside the largest burial mound in North America, untouched, unrecorded, unknown. And Miamisburg Mound tells the same story, only worse, in 1869. Excavators sank a single vertical shaft from the summit and cross-cut it with 2 horizontal tunnels, 8 feet from the top. They found one body in a bark tomb, 36 feet down. They found something that should not have been there, an empty log vault, a room built for a burial that was either never placed or had already been moved. Who moved a body out of a sealed tomb beneath 65 feet of earth? When? And why? Then the excavators quit. More than a century and a half has passed, and Miamisburg Mound has never been systematically excavated. Not once. In a nation obsessed with archaeology, the tallest conical mound in Ohio remains almost entirely unopened. Why? The answer is a wall of overlapping forces, legal, cultural, scientific, political, that have effectively frozen these monuments in place. The most powerful is a federal law, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, signed into law on November 16, 1990. It recognizes that human remains and funerary objects from federal and tribal lands belong to lineal descendants and federally recognized tribes. Any excavation must be preceded by documented consultation, and on tribal lands, by explicit consent. Then, on January 12, 2024, the rules quietly tightened. New regulations were implemented that strengthened tribal authority even further. forcing museums and federal agencies to defer to descendant communities. Under these regulations, opening Grave Creek Mound is now effectively impossible, but the law is only one layer. Recent mitochondrial DNA research has linked ancient remains from these mound-building cultures to modern indigenous nations of the Great Lakes, genetic evidence that, for the first time, ties the builders to living descendants. And those descendants have made their position clear. The mounds will not be opened. However, the consequences of that decision are profound, because whatever those unexcavated vaults contain may change everything we think we know about pre-Columbian America. Consider what the Adena already achieved. Their spiritual successors, the Hopewell, were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site on September 19th, 2023, the 25th in the United States, for geometric and astronomical precision that, quote, would have required generations to codify. Recent laser scanning surveys in central Kentucky, published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, have identified 244 potential archaeological sites, including 206 previously unknown burial mounds, a multidisciplinary scientific study at another Adena-era earthwork, combining magnetometry, laser scanning, and Bayesian statistics on radiocarbon dates, rewrote its construction date by more than 1,000 years. Modern technology is rediscovering the Adena world one scan at a time. And yet, the two largest conical mounds in the country, the very heart of that world, remain sealed somewhere beneath Grave Creek, in chambers identified in the 1800s and never investigated, may lie burials the size and significance of those at Miamisburg's empty lower vault. Bodies. Writing, perhaps. Artifacts of continental trade. Evidence, possibly. Of contact and exchange that history books are not yet ready to accept. And under the rules of federal law, they may never be seen. Here's the dark truth no one wants to say out loud. The reason the largest burial mound in America has not been fully opened is not a single conspiracy. It is something stranger. It is the collision of 19th century treasure hunting that destroyed most of Moundsville's ancient landscape, of a lost tablet whose disappearance may have been deliberate, of a century of suppressed evidence, forgotten affidavits, and editors who quietly removed inconvenient details, of a federal law that, since 1990, has placed these monuments effectively beyond the reach of science, and of something deeper, something we are not supposed to admit, that the official story of who first walked this land, and what they built, and what they knew, may be incomplete. The mounds are silent, but silence is not the same as emptiness. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys at other ancient burial sites have revealed hidden voids, sealed chambers, untouched tombs. The technology now exists to map the inside of Grave Creek Mound without ever breaking its surface. That technology has not been deployed. The reason why is part of the dark answer. Stand at the base of Grave Creek Mound at dusk. Feel the slope rising above you. Picture the 3 million basket loads of earth it took to raise it, each one carried by a human being whose name, language, and face are lost. Picture the two skeletons in the lower chamber, heads almost touching. Picture the unread inscription, the 1700 beads, the missing stone, the sealed vaults at Miamisburg, the unexcavated chambers identified in 1859 and forgotten by history, somewhere beneath your feet. A story is still being kept from us. And the largest burial mound in America may take its secrets to the end of time, unless someone, somewhere, finally decides the truth is more important than the silence. If this story pulled you in, hit that like button. Subscribe for more hidden histories the textbooks left out, and tell me in the comments, should the largest burial mound in America finally be opened? Or are some secrets meant to stay buried forever?